Great. Well, in efforts to maximize our time, we're going to get started with this afternoon, if you are on the East Coast, or this morning's webinar for those on the West Coast. Thank you so much for joining us for Mapping Out the Fleet Electrification Journey, Lessons from Early Adopters. Fleet electrification is accelerating at a rapid pace. Both cleaner and quieter than diesel, gasoline, or natural gas alternatives, battery electric vehicles have become the most cost-effective option for reducing transit fleet emissions. Yet early adopters are discovering logistical and operational challenges. Joining us today on this dynamic panel is Susan Freedman, Senior Clean Transportation Planner from San Diego Association of Governments, Joe Morreale, Section Manager of Electric Vehicle Demo Projects at ConEdison, Matthew Nawn, Chief of Technical Services Division at the Federal Transit Administration, Julio Ortiz, Senior Director of Fleet Services and Administration at the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada. And I'm hopeful that Christine will be signing on. She is the Director of
Erica.
Great. Director of the Office of Environmental and Energy Programs at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. So I feel like I went brief on intros, and I'm hopeful that each of our panelists can provide a little bit more detail about their involvement with electric vehicles, as well as briefly describe your organization's fleet electrification pilot programs. And we're going to kick it off with Matthew starting.
All right. Well, thank you, Erica, and it's really an honor to be here today and represent United States FTA. A little bit about, I'll give you briefly my own background and then a little bit about some of FTA's program. My own work with fleet electrification largely falls from my role as the Chief of the Technical Services Division. What that means within FTA is I am the program manager for our project management oversight program, but more specific to what we're talking about today, I also supervise our vehicle engineering functions and Buy America functions. And those two areas more directly relate to some of the opportunities, if you want to say, some of the programs FTA offers. I wanted to characterize a little bit about what we do. Not so much we have had demonstration projects, and I don't want to downplay that in any way. Our Research and Innovation Office has funded a number of demonstration projects related to electrification, electric vehicles, some really innovative stuff. But how we largely interact with this audience, with the transit community, are through some of our programs, like our Low and No program. It's often called Low-No, low emissions, no emissions. It is a highly competitive program that is focused around low and no emissions vehicles. Oftentimes buses, as one can imagine, zero emission buses, including battery electric buses. It also includes ferry programs and support facilities. Also within FTA, our Buy America program has a large influence on what goes on with the battery electric bus field. It's one thing if I, will encourage today is for our grantees to ensure that the vehicles they select are compliant with the Buy America regulation, as well as utilizing our bus testing reports. As many know, our bus testing program, a vehicle has to have a passing grade, it's pass criteria now, in order to get federal funding for the vehicles. But there's a lot contained within these reports that may help guide our grantees. So that's what I would offer. And again, it's really an honor to be here today.
Thank you. Christine?
Sure. Thank you also for having me and including me in this conversation. So, Christine Weydig, Director of Environmental and Energy Programs for the Port Authority. For those of you not very familiar with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, We operate 5 airports, 6 bridges and tunnels, 8 marine ports. We have the PATH train system that connects New York and New Jersey. We operate some of the busiest transportation hubs in North America, actually our bus terminal in Midtown especially. We also own and operate the World Trade Center site in addition to some other large real estate holdings. So we really operate transportation services and infrastructure. And as it relates specifically to the topic today, we have some in 2018 embraced the Paris Climate Agreement. And so with that, we became the first US transportation agency to do so. We went through a science-based target setting process to establish an interim greenhouse gas reduction goal of 35% by 2025 in our direct greenhouse gas emissions, and an 80 by 50 goal for all scope emissions. So that includes emissions from aircraft, emissions from ocean-going vessels, in addition to all of the vehicles that use our bridges and tunnels, that visit the airports. So it's obviously a really ambitious target and one that we cannot achieve alone. But when we set out the roadmap for achieving our 35 by 25 goal and our long-term goal, we established a number of programs and initiatives. And so included among those was electrifying 100% of the airport shuttle buses across our 3 major airports, JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark, but then also electrifying 50% of our light duty fleet. So these are not, we don't consider our EV commitments pilots. These are strategies and initiatives that we really fully plan on executing across the agency. But obviously the level of ambition today is different than it was in 2018. So we expect that very soon we'll need to map out how we're getting to 100% electrification of our fleets. And one thing that I'd like to point out is, while we have our own fleet electrification goals, what we feel is really important is, by delivering on these goals, we have a very solid platform through which to engage our tenants and partners and customers, because ultimately 96% of our emissions are those indirect emissions. So this way we can show that we're walking the talk, but then also we're learning where a lot of the pain points will be for the electrification journeys of some of our tenants and partners. And when we look at what those electrification journeys look like, it won't just be for the on-road vehicle space. So I think that's an important distinction for the Port Authority, where a lot of the electrification that we know needs to happen to achieve these decarbonization goals, it's on the specialized equipment side, so ground support equipment at our airports, cargo handling equipment at our ports. And so I think by going through this, and we'll talk a little bit more in the program about some of our lessons learned, this is a way to really accelerate the transition to electric, not only for the on-road space, but for off-road as well.
I think we all appreciate your holistic approach and really looking at this as a global perspective. Next on our list is Julio.
Good morning, everyone. Well, here in Las Vegas, as you can probably imagine, one of our priorities is attending to 300,000 people that come here all the time and taking them around. And so I actually, my experience on the electric systems is actually from San Diego, because I work in San Diego Metropolitan Transit System for 34 and a half years. And so when I came to Las Vegas, they didn't have anything going on as far as a plan for electrification. Just in 2019, a new executive order was signed by the governor, where we need to have at least 50% of our fleet in some kind of alternative fuel by 2030. The executive team is very aggressive and they're very motivated to make some changes. So we started testing some new Flyer electric vehicles and Proterra electric vehicles because of the mileage range in Las Vegas, because we tend to so many people. We have an extreme amount of annual average miles. We're running between 65 to 70,000 miles per bus, and the average location in the industry is between 30 and 50,000 miles. So that puts a big fine in the testing that we're doing. We're piloting vehicles. We're trying to do the studies with NV Energy so that we can actually be able to supply the service needs that RTC, the Regional Transportation Commission, needs. So, and that's where the stage that we're at.
Great. Thank you. Joe. You're on mute.
All right. I'll be the first one to take the hit there. In my role as a section manager of electric vehicle demonstration projects at ConEdison, right, we're really focused on building out the utilities role in the electric vehicle space. So at the moment, we don't have any explicit fleet electrification pilots. However, we do have a number of make-ready programs, both our power-ready program, which is aimed at light-duty vehicles, and then a kind of pending medium-duty, heavy-duty pilot program aimed at heavier equipment on New York City's roadways. Both aim to incentivize the utility side of infrastructure related to fleet electrification. So that's to help customers pick up some of those costs associated with that infrastructure. It won't necessarily at the moment help you on the customer equipment side, but in terms of covering utility costs, those are two programs that we have right now that folks can take advantage of to drive their fleet electrification goals. And on the power ready side, we're really seeing a lot of interest there from rideshare companies as well as delivery type organizations and stuff like that. So a lot of good stuff there. We also have behavioral programs. So our Smart Charge New York program incentivizes electric vehicle owners to charge their vehicles during off-night periods or off-peak periods during the overnight, as well as not charge their vehicles during peak periods in the afternoons during summer months. We're always looking to work with fleet owners to understand their needs, and then getting an understanding of what those fleet owners need to operate is critical for us. And then finally, we are working on developing a fleet assessment service, which will enable fleet owners to get a better understanding of the costs and benefits associated with switching their fleets over to fully electric. And so that's in the works and should be coming soon. And I think the last thing I'll plug is our school bus program, right? Pilot incentive program to help electric school buses act as batteries to the grid in New York City and Westchester County during summer months when they're not normally in use. So we're running a demonstration project in White Plains at the moment, and that should prove out over the next couple of years, and we're very excited to see what comes from that.
Great, thanks, Joe.
Yep.
Yes, good morning or afternoon, everybody. I'm in San Diego. It's San Diego Association of Governments, or SANDAG. And so we're a little different as a metropolitan planning organization, which every major metropolitan area in the US has. But we're planning for really the transition of all types of fleets to electric, whether through hydrogen or plug-in battery. And so we've made so far a $30 million commitment to EV charging infrastructure and launched a program in partnership with the California Energy Commission and our local air pollution control district just last fall. We had about a $22 million budget for the first 3 years, and we were oversubscribed at about $100 million worth of applications on the first day. So it was, I guess, a pretty good problem to have, but it just showed the amount of latent demand that's out there for charging infrastructure. The focus of this for the start is on public and workplace infrastructure for passenger vehicles. So fleets are able to charge there as well, as long as it's also open to the public. We are also planning right now with our new regional transportation plan that'll be adopted later this year to expand our charging infrastructure investment through an incentive program from Sandag's personal $30 million investment to almost $300 million through 2050. We are also planning for a vehicle incentive program that will incentivize about 100,000 vehicles between 2024 and 2035 to meet aggressive state goals. And then outside of the light duty vehicle area, we are working with our port, our local utility, our air district, and local governments and Department of Transportation, or Caltrans, to plan out some zero emission, to support our transit agencies on zero emission bus infrastructure, since we do a lot of the planning, design, and build of transit stations in the region. And we are also coming up with these parties a strategy, a sustainable freight strategy for the region. We've got applied for a couple grants that are pending to do that, but are also planning for significant freight infrastructure investment, and hopefully a couple pilots. We're looking to do an RFI in the coming year for a wireless in-road pilot with some freight vehicles, if we can. I'd say we want to get this done. We've got to just get done these other two programs first. So a lot of exciting times.
Yes. Fleet electrification is certainly a hot topic in our industry. And as touched on by each of our panelists here, there is complexities related to the utility and infrastructure, and then how it impacts your fleets and your vehicles and your operations, and certainly the impact on your passengers and customers that utilize these vehicles, and funding and just overall incentives are certainly things that we are all interested in hearing today. So with that, we'll go to our next question. For organizations looking to implement new fleet electrification pilots, what is one piece of advice you can share to set up a new pilot program for success? I'm going to open to the floor for whoever wants to chime in first. Go ahead, Julio.
Well, from my experience, and coming from San Diego with its perfect weather all year, you know, those are the perfect conditions for an electric bus. And I thought, when I started here in Las Vegas a couple of years ago, that, hey, we'll just do the same. But it just so happens that in the summer, we have a range of 110 to 117 degrees. So we had a little bit of a problem adjusting the buses, the Proterra and the New Flyers, to those conditions, you know, because here you got to use air conditioning 100% all the time. And so a piece of advice is looking at your operational needs and what the range of those miles is for you. What is it that you need to accomplish? Because battery electric technology is just growing and developing into better and better and better. And so what used to be the Proterra bus that started years ago with only getting 30 to 40 miles, now you can go 150 miles. So if your blocks are within that range and up to 225 miles, I would say, you will probably have a very successful program, but you have to look at those needs first.
Great advice. Susan?
Yeah, and that is really solid advice. I'll go a different route and say, for starting any of our pilot thinking, we just start talking about it with our stakeholders. So from bringing up the fact that we wanted to establish a regional rebate program for charging infrastructure, our state energy commission heard about the movement we were making. So our first $4.5 million investment, we were able to get match from the state of almost $16 million and another $1.5 million from the air district. And this was over the course of a year and a half of planning.
Great.
But it was, you know, even before we knew the answer, we just started sharing about these are the things we want to do. And we're looking at partnering, or we're looking at existing successes. So I'd say, generally, somebody's already been working on a pilot if you're thinking about it, and the more you can get the word out and get some collaboration going, I'd say a great local resource in a lot of areas is a Clean Cities Coalition as well. And they could provide some resources hopefully to you. But we like reaching out to our utility, our local governments, our equity organizations, and industry.
Thank you. I would say, first off, to the extent that an organization already has telematics installed on its vehicles, that is very helpful in terms of being able to best identify which portions of your fleet or what the driving behavior is for some vehicles in your fleet to better site charging infrastructure. So when the Port Authority started out, we didn't have telematics installed across our fleet. So it was a bit of guesswork in terms of really honing in on the right vehicles to electrify and when and where the charging infrastructure would need to be. We've since rolled out telematics across our fleet, and we're already seeing some real benefits to having that type of data. But then secondly, we moved really quickly in this space, and so I feel like we have all of the bumps and bruises to show for it, but one thing that we're still catching up on is the change management dimension to this, and it's really critical. So these vehicles, the technology is not only different, but the user behavior needs to be different. It's not the same as pulling up to a gas station and filling up when you need to. You know, there has to be a lot more thought given to the state of charge and being able to charge that vehicle in a manner that doesn't interfere with operations, but still ensures that the vehicle will be fully charged when needed. But then also how to operate the vehicles is different. So to really optimize the performance of the vehicles, the driver behavior needs to be adapted to understand how to use the braking system so that you're really maximizing the regenerative capabilities of a lot of these vehicles. What we're seeing on the bus side is that for our busing operation, which we actually outsource to a third party, we own the buses, but the drivers are provided by others, and the operations and maintenance of the buses is performed by others. And what we found is our electric buses were the first buses that any of these operators ever touched. And so making sure that they're familiar with the technology, that they have the spare parts that are needed. We're finding that we need to rearrange driver schedules in a lot of cases for when the driver gets breaks. So can those breaks be timed for when the bus needs to be charged and all of those. So we're redoing all of those schedules. And so I think that really, ideally, that change management piece would be addressed in parallel with the actual conversion to electric, and ideally all of that stakeholder engagement happens upfront so that some of these pain points are identified ahead of time rather than troubleshooting them as they occur.
Great advice to hear in advance of these programs. Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, I would just add that something we've been running into on our end as we think through the user base in New York City and Westchester County is every fleet is different, and their fleet operators generally aren't used to thinking about fueling infrastructure because it's not part of their core business, right? Everybody expects that they'll put a fuel tank in or they'll go out to a gas station and get gas, and that's really not the case with electrification, right? Installation of charging infrastructure requires evaluation and coordination with the utility and other stakeholders. But in some cases, it may require significant advanced planning, especially if the local network doesn't have capacity or you need to build out additional infrastructure. And that's something that program operators should definitely be aware of. And then just understanding the use cases, right? Taxis and rideshare programs, right? They might need to just be able to operate continuously for 8 hours. What we found with some transportation engagements is they like to drive their buses, and then they expect to be able to plug the buses in at the end of the shift, whether or not that shift is ends at midnight or it ends at 1 p.m. right as demand rates are starting to spike, right? So taking into account the needs of a fleet is extremely important and should be considered.
Thanks. Matthew, did you have anything to add?
Sure. The one piece I would add is, and again, my perspective's a little different being, what we do at FTA, but we get a lot of call for our low-note program, like we talked about. And we get a lot of proposals for grantees and entities looking to receive that funding for that pilot program. It is highly competitive. There's always the demand always outstrips the available funding. And I only see that continuing to grow. So one piece of advice I would give is to utilize our FAQs. We have specific frequently asked questions on our website, transit.dot.gov, if you just search for the low-note program. It's rather extensive, but just skimming it over myself, this really can offer a lot to a potential applicant, help them understand how to be competitive when the demand is greater than what we can fund right now. So if you're thinking of that, I really think these are an excellent resource and will only help you have a better chance of success.
Great, thanks. Okay, so to complement our question about advice on successes, what would you identify as the greatest logistical and/or operational challenge in your respective pilot programs? How did your team overcome it? Who wants to start us off on this one?
Well, challenges are so different between every operation, and because of the funding that Matthew provides for us, it's always a challenge on the operational needs on replacing schedules for buses. Because of one-on-one replacement, it becomes a difference on the number of miles that you use that bus. So you might have to have a 1.5 or have a charging system and infrastructure that actually suits those needs for that bus to run 10, 12 hours. And the service needs in Las Vegas can run 18 hours, 19 hours. So that is a big challenge for us, and we work with NV Energy in providing us what we're going to need to be able to make those needs. So you have to really look into that on how you design your infrastructure.
Yeah.
I would maybe build upon that. Charging infrastructure is by far the biggest challenge for the Port Authority. It's certainly where most of the cost is. And when it comes to really making the business case for electrification, the vehicles themselves, you can tell a pretty compelling story about the ongoing savings between fuel and O&M to make that vehicle pay for itself. However, once you factor in the charging infrastructure, your business case just fell apart. But aside from the cost and sort of that initial investment that you need to start electrifying your fleets, for us, it was really about where to put the charging infrastructure. So where in the New York metropolitan area, space is always hard to find, and the right space in the right place is even harder. So when it comes to, say, our busing operation at JFK, there already was a bus depot that we had. So obviously it made sense to install chargers there. There still wasn't a tremendous amount of space or electrical capacity at that location, but that really had to be the location where we installed the infrastructure. But that compared to Newark Airport, where the buses at Newark don't actually stay on airport, the conventional buses, they would go to our third-party operators depot at night. And so for us, we had to identify a greenfield location on airport where we could install the charging infrastructure. and we managed to find it. But now in terms of scaling up the fleet, that location already, we've maxed out all of the space at that location. So if we want to expand the fleet, which we're looking at right now, that means we now need to find another location for these chargers that makes sense operationally, because you can't have a bus go miles out of its way to charge. It adds to congestion at the airport. It could potentially impact operations, but then obviously you're also not really optimizing the vehicle's miles traveled in this case. So there's that. And then on the light duty side, it's even harder because, again, for a combustion engine vehicle, you can go to a fueling station and in a few minutes you're ready to go. Whereas for the early light duty vehicles that we had electrified, we put chargers at the location where those vehicles typically stay. So if it's at an administrative building at one of our facilities, we would put the charging stations at that administration building. But that is not really the most scalable approach. So for every vehicle in your fleet, you need to figure out where its home is and put a unique charging station there for that specific vehicle. Long term, that really can't be the way we roll it out. And so this is still one of the challenges that we need to overcome is there, even on the light duty fleet side, a centralized charging hub style solution that we need to look at? And if so, where is that going? Capacity at that location for it to make sense. So I would say the charging infrastructure itself, both the cost and the complexity, but then also the siting really is one of our primary challenges.
Joe, I think you had.
Yeah, thanks. I would just add to that a little bit. The overall novelty of the EV space for vehicles and transportation in general, with perhaps the exception of rail, it's just so new that beyond a handful of first adopters, we're running into barriers where trying to communicate where the market is heading, why it's beneficial for fleet owners to make this switch, and then trying to understand customers' needs and level of complexion of the systems they're trying to implement. All of this is just kind of colliding in the space at the moment. And so it's important to be aware that, again, like I said earlier, not every fleet is the same, but also not every fleet operator is the same. And so we're kind of starting with the low-hanging fruit, which is, organizations and municipalities with corporate sustainability goals. So they've kind of made that initial statement of this is the direction we want to move in. We're anticipating greater challenges as we head towards more widespread fleet adoption, which is how do we sell this to people? So I just wanted to flag that as well.
Thanks. Matthew, did you have anything?
Yes, more, and if you want to think of this as looking forward, I don't see these as current logistical challenges, but something as we look ahead. Two things that we've just started to scratch the surface on at FTA are the challenges associated when these, we're still, if you want to say, in the first generation of electric transit buses, reach their useful life. First of all, assuring they make the 12-year federally stipulated useful life. And even more so, what does battery end of life look like, specific for battery electric buses? There's concepts now where the batteries could be used for, standalone electrical infrastructure. But at some point, what does that recycling look like? What does that, cradle to grave look like? And what are the environmental impacts? And what role does our continued, it's going to continue, the continued promotion of zero electric vehicles. How does that play a role? And how do we plan for these things up front? Because much like Joe said, we still have a relatively new technology, particularly as applied to heavy-duty vehicles like a heavy-duty transit bus. And these are some things we're trying to think of now, so we're several years ahead of it.
And I think what's been evident in some of our comments today is that the successes are dependent on that planning ahead and coordinating with stakeholders and really being in tune with what the future may look like. Susan, did you have anything to add to this question?
Yeah, briefly, I'd say some of our operational challenges that we haven't solved yet are that we have 4 transportation agencies in the region in San Diego County. So we have Caltrans District 11, SANDAG as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, and the Transit Planning Agency. And then we have MTS and NCTD, our 2 transit operators. So when it comes to citing, like creating these new mobility hubs, kind of transit stations on steroids, and wanting to install EV charging, whether it's for buses or for pickup and drop off and for TNCs like Ubers and Lyfts, it's just the constant questions of roles and responsibilities across agencies, who pays for what, who's responsible for the ongoing operations and maintenance, who does the competitive procurements and such. And we've been grappling with this for over 5 years with a couple test sites, or I guess we have 4 transit sites that we've put in charging in different ways. So we still can really get it straight. So we applied for and were awarded a planning grant that's launching this spring, I guess next month, to do a regional EV charger management strategy, which is focused on management of public assets by the transportation agencies, and also open to other public agencies, including our port. So it's something we're still grappling with. We're planning for this major shift to all zero emission vehicles by 2050, no new zero emission vehicles by 2035. So it's a massive change out, and we're trying to keep pushing the ball forward, but we've got these real operational difficulties that we've got to work out, which hopefully we will get solved in the next couple of years through this Caltrans planning grant we got.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to pivot a little bit because you discussed charge management in how SANDAG is planning from a regional perspective. There was a question from the audience that asked, what experience has the panel had with the charge management systems for their pilot schemes? Which I think is very current to what everyone is planning. So I wanted to open that up to see if anyone else had any feedback with their pilots.
Well, I can tell you some of the experience I have gone through other properties because I want to learn from them. San Diego has ChargePoint chargers. I went to Minnesota and they have Siemens. We have seen some Wave chargers, and respectively to the transit property, when you're designing your charging infrastructure, you have to take in accommodations of where you're at. You know, we experienced in Minnesota when we went into the real cold weather, that how the cold weather actually affects the chargers. We've seen that here in Las Vegas, we might have to have the chargers in an enclosure to be able to not, I mean, when it gets down to 117, 120, it just, the chargers just cannot handle it. And so that's what you need to take into consideration when designing your charging infrastructure. And I'll leave it up to the guys that have more experience on this.
I'm adding something that I'm putting in the chat here, and it's really about what Julio just mentioned was San Diego MTS has 8 buses, zero emission buses that have been in operation. 6 have been in operation for a year now. And I'm gonna add a link into the chat. Tomorrow, their board of directors meeting is gonna get an update on how the charging's been working, how the vehicles have been operating with a year's worth of data. And that will be a public meeting, so people would be able to listen in. But I would recommend going straight to the source on the bus front. So I'll add that in the chat here.
Great, thanks, Susan. Joe?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So we do have, with our Smart Charge program, we do have a fairly mature managed charging program that's in process. As of today, we have a little north of 2,300 vehicles enrolled in our service territory. And it's been popular. I have to say we haven't captured every EV that's come through the service territory, either through a combination of the economics don't work out or distrust towards the way the program is structured, where you have to install this kind of third-party device in your vehicle to validate the charging as it goes. And so that's something we're looking at and trying to figure out, is there a way we can optimize this and make it seamless and basic to the end user and stuff like that. But we've got 37 supported makes and models. Of those, 34 different makes and models are actually enrolled in the program. It is overwhelmingly dominated by Tesla vehicles, which is perhaps more a function of our service territory than anything else. But it may also be that that's the most popular vehicle on the market or whatever. Not going to get too much into that, but strong participation. And I think what we're trying to figure out right now is how do we continue to grow this program and make it attractive to residential and now fleet owner operators in our service territory.
Great, thanks. So we're winding down in time. There's approximately 15 to 20 minutes left. So I wanted to give each panelist an opportunity just for some closing remarks, for consideration, carbon neutrality goals, different mandates and incentives, or even future technology advancements, because we all wish that we had a crystal ball to tell what was happening next, because it could impact each of us all differently. So I'm going to put Matthew on the spot to go first with his closing remarks.
Thanks, Erica. Well, first, I want to again say what a real pleasure it is today to be part of this. It's a great opportunity to hear from the panelists we have today and the range of experience from operators, from electric utilities, et cetera. This is really a great opportunity. And looking ahead to the future, I think you're going to see only a continued growth in zero emissions technologies, electric technologies, particularly for my world, transportation, public transportation. I think you'll see more coming out from the department and the new administration along those goals, and specifically how public transit fits into that. Encourage to try and stay abreast of the new technologies that are coming and look at how they're applicable, but also not to forget that sustainability piece, and again, that end of life piece. What does it look like? The entire perspective from both inception to retirement, and then reuse or recycling. So I think the future is bright, and you'll see more from the Department of Transportation, particularly in the next few years, only furthering these goals.
Great, thank you, Matthew. Susan?
Sure. Well, a lot of what we do is really driven by cleaning the air and reducing greenhouse gas emissions in terms of, I'd say, California-wide transition to zero-emission vehicles. And that, I feel like, has really shown the market development aspect of this and workforce development, so a lot of co-benefits. But we're pushing hard, not just at SANDAG, but the local governments with climate action plans, our local utility, the air district, everybody, because we have called an innovative clean transit rule, where all buses must be zero emission by 2040 with a caveat in California. We also have new governor executive order from late last year for all new passenger vehicles to be zero emission only by 2035, all new short haul drayage trucks by 2035, all long haul trucks by 2045. And our Air Resources Board has been putting in rules to enforce that as well. So we're really looking at how do we push hard on this. And so, as I mentioned, I didn't highlight everything we're doing, but in our new long-range transportation plan that looks out to 2050, SANDAG is planning about $2 billion worth of investment in transportation electrification. On the passenger vehicle side, we are one of the leads in that, along with our utility. And then we're more in a supporting role for medium duty, heavy duty to support the transit agencies, support sustainable freight. So we're really looking at a huge transition, and it's all hands on deck, and it's pretty exciting. But I'd say we even have our political leadership all behind this at this point, on both sides of the fence, and it's it's a pretty fun time to be in electrification.
Great, thank you. Joseph.
Yeah, I looked perhaps a little bit further ahead for this question, but I think where I see the market going is I see EVs being very much a commodity that's based on the capabilities of the battery. Everything else is really just dressing for how quickly does it charge and how far can it take me. And so I see battery advancement continuing to drive the market for at least the next decade or so. But at the same time, in parallel, I think widespread adoption of integrated fleet management tools that talk to these vehicles that are essentially going to be moving smart devices will help fleet operators manage their fleets, get a better understanding of when their vehicles are going to be available, right? I could see software that helps support, okay, this vehicle is coming off of XYZ duty cycle and you're going to plug it in for 30 minutes and then it's going to be good to go for this small delivery or this short run that I have coming up. And then if you pair that with autonomous driving, if that continues to develop, we could really see the market just totally revolutionized, but that's perhaps a little bit further off.
I like the future forward thinking.
That's what we're all about here.
Yes. Christine?
So I think our expectation is with the new administration in Washington, everyone's attention will be raised. Already, of course, I mean, California has been a leader for some time, but New York and New Jersey have some very ambitious climate and EV specific goals. But what I think we're noticing is all of the US OEMs are now taking EVs seriously. I mean, seriously to the point that you see exciting announcements from GM and Ford and others about their plans for manufacturing electric vehicles, which is really encouraging because one of the other challenges that we've had is most of our fleet is medium to heavy duty, and some of it is specialized equipment. And so in terms of model availability, we haven't really had the very many options, especially when you layer on top of that Buy America provisions. And so we're excited about the fact that we will see a lot more models coming available to meet our needs. And so with that, we're also looking at how our future buildings will be able to accommodate the electrification of the market. So we're in the process of scoping a brand new bus terminal in Midtown Manhattan. We're expecting it will cost roughly $10 billion, but it will be built to accommodate all electric bus fleets. So, that's an opportunity for us to really, from the ground up, make sure the electrical capacity is there, make sure that the chargers are where they need to be, but still in a manner that reduces congestion, makes sure throughput is enhanced. So looking at the staging areas for the buses and where are those appropriate locations. And that's where, when it comes to the technology side, we're hopeful that induction charging will be an option for us, at least for applications at the gates in that case, where it really is more of an opportunity charge rather than having the bus dwell there and get charged in that manner. And so we're even aiming to have the new bus terminal be constructed with a net zero ambition overall. And so I think that we're seeing that the policy landscape will really be supportive of adoption of EVs, and hopefully with that comes some of the incentive dollars that we know are really important, especially until some of the vehicles reach price parity or until some of the charging solutions really are a little bit further developed so that the costs can come down.
Thank you. Julio?
Well, here the Regional Transportation Commission is very ambitious about changing the ways things are from the past. So they have made me in charge of this big project to be able to bring these vehicles, the zero emission vehicles, into here. And they have just adopted a Senate Bill 358, which for us it calls actually to be 50% by 2030. But RTC just would like to see an accelerated plan into how we make this to go 100%. And so it is very challenging because, I'm working with my engineering group because of the infrastructure of such thing to be able to develop this block. The blocks that we have run into 200 miles, but with the new battery technology that's advancing from Rotera and New Flyer, we have 450 kilowatts. We have 600 kilowatt powers, that we will be able to use and get a range on buses from 200 to 225 miles. So I think it will set things up to be able to do that. So we're seeing very, very good future in the zero emission vehicles.
Great, thank you for those insights. Well, we're just about wrapped up with time here. I'm going to do a quick scan through some questions to see. We have approximately 5 minutes. Let's see. One of the questions is, do you see on-site distributed energy resources playing a role in the development of charging infrastructure and its resiliency? A large consideration, or would the assets be mostly about optimizing the infrastructure and operational costs?
I can start this one. We're absolutely in California looking at on-site distributed energy resources with planning for charging depots and everything. In our region, we have some of the highest demand charges in the United States. So the cost with EV charging is always an issue. And this is similar with even we are trying to figure out how to get more hydrogen fueling stations in the region. We only have one right now and one in permitting. So yeah, we've actually with planning these new mobility hubs that will be rolling out over the next decade to enhance transit stations. Anywhere we're planning large scale EV charging with that, we're also planning for battery storage and solar because we need the one for climate resiliency, but also for grid redundancy because we have a lot of power safety shutoffs out here. And we can't rely 100% on the grid if we're looking to electrify everything. We definitely need a lot of more distributed power, but I'd say we're at the early stages of that.
Great, thank you.
I would say, answer similarly that on-site distributed energy is going to be a really critical part of the solution, and it's not just for the vehicles, it's just for overall greenhouse gas reduction goals and electrification goals of buildings and other process loads. But on the topic of resiliency specifically, I think that's something that even the early adopters like the Port Authority are also playing catch up with on a certain level, because again, we were eager to demonstrate the leadership and start the engagement with our tenants in moving quickly into this space. But as you look ahead and take an airport, for example, if once everything starts to get electrified, the equipment and the surface transportation, and eventually I think I saw a question pop up about electric vertical takeoff and landing craft. We're also expecting that electric aircraft for small regional trips is not very far off at all. You're really looking at a huge growth in electrical load at the airports, and growth that I don't think was anticipated even a handful of years ago. And so now, as we have redevelopment programs underway at all three of our major airports, LaGuardia really being closest to the finish line, and JFK being the one that's really starting to get out the gate right now. All of these capacity requirements need to be factored into the planning of the distribution infrastructure and of the generating resources, looking at what you're getting from the grid. But I think the need to supplement that with on-site generation is really important. But now, how are you backing up all of these things that you just electrified? When we have AirTrain service at JFK today, at Newark today, and at LaGuardia, where that's one of our big projects that we're working on now, is building out the LaGuardia AirTrain. But their AirTrain goes down for planned purposes and there are unplanned outages. And then we have part of our bus fleet serves only as backup for when the AirTrain goes down. But you can't have a backup fleet of electric vehicles. If the system shuts down immediately, how are you going to ensure that all of those buses are charged? And so there are all of these different operational quirks. But that being said, regardless, you need to make sure that those services are available when they're needed, and having some resilient solution to make sure if your power is interrupted for any reason that you can still perform these essential services, I think can only be met with some combination of on-site generation and storage.
Great, thank you. So we're right at our 2:30 mark. I just wanted to take this last minute to say thank you so much to each of our panelists. You're really experts and thought leaders in the fields of fleet electrification, and we appreciate your comments and advice today. So thank you. And also thank you for all of our audience members for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.